This is the Forgecast, your eye into the who's who and what's what in cybersecurity and the cloud. Each episode, we bring you fresh perspectives, personal stories, insights, and advice from leaders, innovators, and change makers forging a stronger future.
Welcome to Forgecast. I'm your host, Dixon, and I am pleased to have with me today Pascal Millaire, the CEO of CyberCube. Pascal is the founder of CyberCube over a decade ago and has built the business to be the #1 provider to the cyber insurance industry of the analytics modeling necessary for the industry to function correctly. But let me just back up and set the stage, because this is a huge idea and a big opportunity for CyberCube. Global losses from cyber crime are over $10 trillion a year. And the way that companies can insure against that loss, not unlike how a homeowner insures against the loss of their home due to fire, is they buy insurance, and they buy cyber insurance to protect against cybercrime and help cover the losses that occur from the cybercrime. When Pascal started this business, premiums, that is the amount of money that companies pay for the insurance for cyber insurance, were less than $1 billion a year. And now, 10 years later, they're over 11 billion a year. So over a 10 times increase. And Pascal's company, CyberCube, and I'm fortunate to be on the board and an investor in CyberCube, has really positioned itself to be the #1 provider at the key choke point in this industry of helping provide the insurance companies that provide cyber insurance with the analytical modeling to determine how much to charge, so that over the long term they can make money. So we're going to spend today talking to Pascal about his company, CyberCube. And after we kind of give you the idea of what it does and why it's successful and how successful it is, I'd like to turn back the clock and ask Pascal about his career as an executive. From when he started out in New Zealand, where he was born, all the way now to living in San Francisco. So, Pascal, welcome. And why don't you tell me about CyberCube, what it does, how it works, and what value it provides to your customers.
Sure. Thanks, Don, and it's a pleasure to be on here. As you pointed out, CyberCube is the world's leading provider of cyber risk analytics to the insurance industry. And cyber is indeed a really big deal to P&C insurers. Cyber is the fastest growing line of insurance to emerge in a generation. It's expected to become one of, if not the largest line of insurance in the multi-trillion-dollar property and casualty insurance industry. And in order to reach that growth potential, the industry needs analytics to price, underwrite, model cyber risk. And that's precisely what CyberCube does for the world's largest insurers, reinsurers, and brokers.
Pascal, what is analytics modeling? What do you actually do for these insurance companies?
At its core, we put a price on cyber risk. We put a price on cyber risk for brokers that are selling cyber insurance. So an enterprise knows if they have a 5 million, a 50 million, a 250 million problem at hand. We put a price on cyber risk for underwriters, so they can make a decision about whether a particular account is going to be profitable or not. And we allow those in portfolio management to put a price on reinsurance contracts and now insurance-linked securities contracts, so they understand when catastrophic cyber events happen, how much capital is needed to be held against those portfolios.
Pascal, it's easy to understand fire insurance because you figure out the value of the building that has to get replaced. How do you figure out the cost of cyber damage?
Sure. Well, first you start and you take analogies from lines of insurance like fire. And that was hard to do when this business first started out. but we've now reached a critical mass where our largest clients are paying out hundreds, if not thousands of claims. You look at those claims and you layer on top what is the frequency of an event and what is the severity or cost of an event using traditional actuarial methods. But in order to price cyber risk, you can't just stop there. You have to look at global cybersecurity data, the evolving threat landscape. And as CyberCube, what we do very uniquely is we take those actuarial insurance approaches, we pair them with cybersecurity and technology approaches, and by bringing those two things together, we're able to deliver the world's leading analytics to quantify cyber risk in financial terms.
Mm-hmm. Pascal, when Forgepoint Capital first met you, you were an employee of Symantec.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do at Symantec to begin the business? And then what progressed from there in terms of starting the company as an independent company?
Sure. So executives at Symantec recognized that cyber insurance was becoming a very big deal. And as a Fortune 500 cybersecurity company at the time, hearing that cyber insurance could become one of the largest lines of insurance in this multi-trillion-dollar industry, they wanted to know, was there an opportunity to apply their data and their expertise to solve cyber insurance challenges? So I was brought in to incubate the business initially within Symantec. And what I found in doing that was we had an incredible opportunity in front of us. We had an opportunity to create the firm that was the go-to provider that was going to power the future growth of insurance. We had an enormous head start in terms of capital, data, and expertise to create models. And in doing so, we could not only shape the future of insurance, but change how cybersecurity was thought of over the long term as well. So we spent a couple of years within Symantec incubating the business. But then when it was time to launch, it was very clear that the cyber insurance customer wasn't the same as the Symantec customer, that there was an inherent conflict in rating your customers for insurance purposes when you're selling them security. And perhaps most importantly, Greg Clark, the CEO of Symantec at the time, recognized that we would need a nimble startup that was singularly focused on becoming the preeminent partner to the cyber insurance industry. And that's when we raised our Series A. That's when we bought in Forgepoint and injected that DNA that was really needed to create a lasting institution serving this dynamic market.
Fortunate for us that we did that. Of course, at the time you had no revenues, so it was a big bet on the quality of the team. But you'd already demonstrated the ability to build an enterprise class application, and that you had a proprietary source of data. Let me dwell on data for a minute, because you need data in order to come up with these analytical models. What kind of data do you need, and what does that data indicate and lead to a conclusion and a recommendation for your clients?
Sure. Now, data is absolutely essential to any analytics company. And when we started the business, the refrain from insurers was often, the problem with cyber is that there's not enough data available to us. Fast forward to today, the mindset's really changed. I think the mindset today is more often, the problem with cyber is there's too much data available. It's hard to understand the data, to access the data, to make sense of the data. So a core part of what we do is really take that data and distill it into actionable insights. We think about data in terms of two categories. The first category is cybersecurity data that comes from our proprietary data collection technologies, as well as our partnerships with cybersecurity companies, many of whom were relationships that Forgepoint helped us create. We then pair that data with data from the insurance industry, financial data, exposure data, broker application data, claims and loss data. And uniquely, when you're able to train cybersecurity data against insurance and financial data, you can quantify cyber risk in financial terms in a way that you couldn't otherwise. And so for us, we're in the very fortunate position of now serving over 100 insurance clients, 30 of the 40 largest US and European cyber insurers, And as we work with those carriers, as we get data and analytic feedback on our models, it really allows us to deliver the world's leading analytics to quantify cyber risk, create a competitive moat versus other competitors or internal models, and really keep driving insight in a way that we simply couldn't if we didn't sit on both of those data sources and if we didn't have the market position that we have today.
Of course, it was an advantage to have built the enterprise class application within Symantec. When you were freed to act independently from Symantec, one of the first things you did as a CEO was to build a world-class board of directors, with the exception of me, of course. You brought on board executives and industry leaders that would indicate to the insurance industry that you were serious and you were building a company that could be a public company. How did you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think I thought about that in conjunction with Forgepoint. We knew in bringing Forgepoint along as a partner that we would have access to cybersecurity, data, companies, expertise. But actually, in the very early days, it was that company building that was really important. When we went out to insurers, we could not be a move fast and break things startup, because when you're breaking things in insurance, you're breaking the balance sheet of centuries old insurers. So we needed to project both, number one, the information security hygiene that came from our roots within a Fortune 500 cybersecurity company, and two, a company that was a business that our clients could partner with, not just for years, but for decades. And so taking early steps, such as with Forgepoint's help, recruiting retired Admiral Mike Rogers, former head of the NSA and Cyber Command, to our board of directors in the first few months, we were signaling that we were really serious about supporting them for the long term, and we were a partner that they could trust.
The other thing that you did well was to identify the investors for the next round of capital, just after you'd raised the first round of capital. How did you think about identifying which investors you thought would do a good job of not only bringing money, but also bringing expertise and insurance industry credibility?
Yeah, so running our Series A, we had a big check next to the cybersecurity expertise that we needed in order to be successful with the Forgepoint investment. At the same time, we were trying to create one of the most valuable institutions in the insurance industry. And as such, as we sought to raise capital for our Series B, having insurance-savvy investors both to A, direct the future of the company, and B, signal that long-term view was really important. So we were thrilled to have brought on board MTech Capital, Hudson Structured Capital Management, and individuals from Stone Point Capital, all premier investors in the insurance space, into our Series B. And I think that really injected that DNA that brought the cyber world with the insurance world together at the board level that we were seeking to do at the ground floor level with team members within the company.
Well, it surely has been a pleasure for me to be able to explain cybersecurity to the insurance investors and for them to explain insurance to me. But you also made two additional moves. You did a top-up round with a fund from Morgan Stanley. And then I think one of the most important moves is you brought in the retired CEO of Verisk. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So firstly, on bringing in additional capital, as anyone that follows the tech market or the insurtech market will know, there were some pretty big disruptions over the course of the last couple of years in terms of valuations, what investors were looking for, and expectations. And so as we thought on delivering the world's leading analytics to quantify cyber risk for the insurance industry, having that long-term view and able to take long-term time horizons, bring on board Morgan Stanley, MSTV as a capital partner to signal that long-term strength was a move that was really welcomed internally and by our clients so that we can focus on growing the business, rather than necessarily on short-term capital. In addition, Scott Stevenson was a really important add to our business. Scott previously had been the CEO of Verisk, which is a Fortune 500 provider of physical property analytics to the insurance industry. As we thought about the couple of decades that he'd spent at Verisk, creating these deep partnerships with the insurance industry and physical property, there were very, very clear analogies as we thought about what we are doing at CyberCube with the next generation of insurance, which isn't about physical property, it's about digital property, digital risk, cyber risk. And so Scott has been a tremendous asset to myself and the broader board as we think about building that long-term institution that's going to be that preeminent partner to the insurance industry long-term in a way that he'd done in his prior employer.
Mm-hmm. Well, the wave that we're riding is the digitization of corporations around the world. And as they go from having their value being primarily in physical assets to virtual assets, those virtual assets are at risk for attack by cyber criminals and nation state actors for theft. So if you think about 30 years ago, Exxon and General Electric were the highest market cap companies. And now it's all of the virtual companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon and others. And that's the business that you're in, is protecting them. So we basically are in front of the virtual assets that need to get protected. So let me just step back and let's now we've positioned the company that you've built as being the leader in its category. Let's go back and talk about your personal story and how you've gotten there from here. Now, I guess my first question is, you grew up in New Zealand. How long did you live in New Zealand, and how come you don't have a Kiwi accent?
I get asked that. I get asked that all the time. I think in the US, people say, "Well, it doesn't quite sound like you're from around here," and the same happens in New Zealand. But grew up in New Zealand up until the age of 18, at which point I received a scholarship to study at Cambridge in the UK, and then was lured back to New Zealand to join McKinsey and Company as a management consultant, which took me all over the world before moving to California 18 years ago.
So McKinsey always promises to give you your hometown and then puts you in Rockville, Maryland for 5 years. Anyway, so what did you do at McKinsey?
So at McKinsey, that's where I got my initial introduction to insurance. And that's not an industry I thought that I would have chose. But very early in my career, I did make that conscious decision. Now, I wish it was for the underlying attractiveness of the industry, but if truth be told, my staffing manager provided me with two options. The first option was to take a 7-hour flight to Perth, Australia, hop on a small Cessna to fly to an airstrip, drive for 2 hours and sleep on a mining manager's couch, or fly to Sydney and start working in financial services. I chose the latter, and fortunately, as it turned out, and as I got deeper there, I found that insurance was a super interesting industry, which surprises a lot of people. In fact, if I'm on a plane and I don't want to talk to the person next to me, I'll often tell them that I make software for insurance companies, and they generally get pretty busy at that point with other things. But analytically, it's a super interesting industry. It supports virtually every area of the global economy. As consumers, our lives, wouldn't function without it. And at McKinsey, I had the opportunity to work in actuarial pricing, insurance product strategy, the compensation of brokers, claims process redesign, reorgs, risk committee design, M&A, and every one of those experiences made me, as the CEO of a cyber insurance analytics company, a better partner to the companies that I'm now serving as CEO, because I had that 360-degree view of different elements of the insurance industry. And so I'm forever grateful for that for that time.
Many McKinsey consultants end up being in senior leadership positions, in senior operating positions, and they have to make the transition from being an advisor to being a decision maker. So what's your management style and your communication style, your leadership style, and how did you make that transition?
Sure. Well, first, I think there's a lot that can be taken from McKinsey, and so it's no surprise that McKinsey wins a bunch of accolades in terms of the percent of their alums that go on to be CEOs of companies, and it's particularly true in the insurance industry, actually. And so I think my biggest takeaway from McKinsey is their recognition that their biggest asset was their culture, a culture that attracts exceptional people, and it turned it into an esteemed institution, because that's really at the core what McKinsey has. And so recognizing the importance of culture and the need to work on it really deliberately, I think has been one of the enduring features of my time at McKinsey. Now, at the same time, the jokes that they make about consultants are somewhat true, about spending a lot of time in PowerPoint and a lot of time polishing PowerPoint slides, and that's just not how the real world works. And so once I'd left McKinsey, I was doing some consulting work for a hotel software company. I got so involved that the CEO asked me to become president of the company to help actually get stuff done. And that shift from advising, conversations, PowerPoint, to my first year in that role, where we grew our contracts 10x, moved from one country to 5 continents, took outsourced development in-house, and really turned the business kind of upside down, showed a pace of change that was, and decision-making, with mistakes along the way, mind you, that was fundamentally different from the time at McKinsey and my time at McKinsey, and fundamentally energizing in terms of what I wanted to do with my career and my days, is actually get things done and see them through. So I would say, look, McKinsey is an incredible institution. It's not a long-term career for many, but it's a great place to start. And I'm glad that's where I did start.
And how long were you at the hotel software company?
That was around 18 months as we did some pretty major kind of transformations there. And it was enough for me to get a taste for wanting to do more in the software space.
How did you make the transition to Symantec and to San Francisco?
Sure. Well, I moved to San Francisco for love. And I'm now a very happy San Francisco resident. And with Symantec wanted someone that had a grounding in insurance, someone that had a grounding in leading a software business. And at the time, that was a pretty small subset of people, and remains relatively small. Insurance is one of the world's largest industries. 10% of the Fortune 500 are insurers, but still, when it comes to technology, innovation, it's really kind of years behind many other industries in terms of being shook up. And I think that's where insurtechs and firms like CyberCube are really kind of breathing some new life into this very large, very important, but often technologically kind of lagging industry.
So what specifically does Symantec have you doing?
Symantec had us do, or had me do 2 things. First is look at how Symantec products for both the consumer and enterprise business could be bundled with insurance products. But then secondly, and most importantly, look at how Symantec's data and Symantec's expertise could be used to solve some of the core analytic challenges that the insurance industry had. Now, my personal philosophy at the time was the worst thing that we could do was sit in a windowless room in Silicon Valley designing products and analytics products that we thought the insurance industry would need. So it was really important to me in the early days that we brought on design partners, joint development partners, in order to undertake our modeling initiatives. So we would build what insurers needed and insurance institutions needed versus what we thought they needed. So in the early days at Symantec, a core part of what we did was, number one, recruit really good insurance executive talent to appear with the cybersecurity and technology talent within the company. And then number two, form these partnerships with globally leading institutions to ensure the initial products that we were developing were things that they could actually use and make a difference.
What you were doing was not just looking at historical data, but you were actually looking at the ability, creating the ability to predict losses based upon data. So I can think back to 30 years ago when people first started to attack the issue of how do you predict catastrophic losses from hurricanes, fires, floods, and earthquakes, and sell insurance for that. So really, there was a model there in the property and casualty industry about predicting future losses. But it seems difficult to me that one could predict the losses from cyber insurance. How did you first come to grips with that?
Yeah, well, first was to say, let's look at the history of insurance over hundreds of years. And this is something that the insurance industry has done time and time again. As new risks unfold, as there are new priorities of enterprises and consumers, insurers have a very long history of taking small initial bets, building up claims histories, and developing products around that over time. And in some ways, cyber actually is more predictable and less volatile than other major lines of insurance. I think about surety insurance. I think about directors and officers insurance. I think about the very early days of some of the kind of initial kind of like workers' comp insurance that started coming out. The insurance industry is used to taking these initial steps to start building up claims histories and then kind of moving from there. So from a CyberCube perspective, I would say at the early days, though, there was more art than there was science today. But today, fast forward, we have clients that are paying out hundreds and thousands of claims, which we're calibrating our models against. And our models are turning out to be right. 2 years ago, CyberCube's projected industry loss ratio was 3 percentage points off the National Association of Insurance Commissioners' year-end loss ratio. Last year, we were 1 percentage point off. So yes, it's difficult to price cyber. Yes, it's difficult to reflect the changing loss landscape. But when you're working with the world's largest insurers and can calibrate your losses against those insurers, and you have deep technology, security expertise, and data to monitor what's happening in the threat actor landscape, bringing those two things together enable you to deliver models that are performing and are enabling insurers to price risk. And what's critical to know about insurers is our problem statement is very different than cybersecurity. In cybersecurity, a CISO needs to be right every time with respect to hackers and those seeking to penetrate their systems. A hacker only needs to be right once. They can try many, many times. They need to be right once to actually get into a system and cause damage. Insurers fall into neither of those buckets. Insurers need to be right on average over tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of policies. And that's a part of the benefit of insurance and insurance analytics. And with CyberCube's help, the industry in the main is actually getting this right and pricing risk thoughtfully, appropriately, and adapting as the underlying threat landscape changes.
Let's talk about how the industry has matured. When you and I first went to the Monte Carlo conference for reinsurers, I was stunned to learn that the reinsurance industry was making very large insurance decisions based upon only 3 pieces of data about each company: what industry they were in, what broad revenue range they were in, and what geographic location they were in. I thought to myself, none of that is informed by the risks of cybersecurity that I'm certainly aware of. But now I've basically, through the conferences that are hosted by CyberCube, I've seen the industry change in terms of its sophistication of being able to identify and analyze risk themselves. What's your perspective on that?
I think that's absolutely the case. After years of selling tens of thousands of policies, after years of paying out hundreds and thousands of claims, CyberCube is able to partner with our insurance carriers to drive better underwriting decisions. I think ransomware was a key example of that. We got to the point where a substantial portion of all ransomware claims globally were based on 2 things. Number one, ineffective multi-factor authentication, and number 2, certain open ports and open RDP ports. And so by using CyberCube single risk analytics, insurers were able to make better, more informed decisions about what made a good risk and a not so good risk. Now, our models, through machine learning, through new data sources, through calibration with our clients, have moved forward in leaps and bounds since then. And we have cybersecurity signals that, if present in a company, in the CyberCube analytics, will lead to a 25x increase in the likelihood of claims, a 20x increase, a 12x increase. And so we are arming insurers with the data that they need to both make a better underwriting and pricing decision, but perhaps even more exciting is insurers being a force for good to point out that companies have vulnerabilities, that companies should address those vulnerabilities, and that insurers have seen claims looking at signals from companies like CyberCube that need to be addressed. So as I think about when we started the business 8 years ago, there was a bunch of catch-up that the insurance industry needed to do with cybersecurity. But I think we've actually reached a point now where cyber insurance analytics are actually able to teach the cybersecurity industry about what actually does drive losses, the probability and severity of losses, and what should we be doing about it.
Well, clearly we're seeing that in our cybersecurity investing practice, where the 8 or 9 questions that are being asked of companies before they can be underwritten. And if they can't answer those questions correctly, they have to fix their internal operations in order to do so. This is really helping tamp down the losses. But nonetheless, the old story about once you begin a battle, the enemy has a vote. And the enemy here has been incredibly creative and nimble to keep changing the shape of the battlefield in order to continue to hack. So you've been a visionary, clearly back in 2012 when you thought about starting the CyberCube operation within Symantec. That was visionary. So let's talk about your vision going forward in terms of the products or markets. And obviously, no conversation could be held today with reference to Gen AI or artificial intelligence. So maybe I can just start with that question. What are you doing today in artificial intelligence, and what are you doing in the future with Gen AI?
Sure. So artificial intelligence has always been a core part of what we do and a core part of how we deliver the world's leading analytics to quantify cyber risk, using tools like machine learning to train our models. Large language models are an incredibly important development, and they're not a future development. We're already seeing tremendous lift in our models from LLMs today. How are we using them? We're using LLMs to extract data at scale to understand the global internet in structured ways that we couldn't before. We're using large language models to fill gaps in our proprietary tech dependency data. And our early testing shows it's allowing us to eliminate up to 90% of the gaps that we see in our own data sets with respect to the technology dependencies that companies have to single points of failure. So it's still very, a very rapidly evolving space for us. But AI has been a core part of what we do since our beginning. And large language models are now turbocharging our analytics. We're leaning even further in to see how generative AI can help an underwriter make quicker decisions, access the compendiums of information that exist within the CyberCube network. And I do expect this to be a transformational technology for not just risk in the global economy, but how insurers understand and analyze that risk.
Mm-hmm. The amount of capital needed in the insurance industry to back the cyber risks that they are taking by writing insurance policies may be in excess of what the industry can afford on their own balance sheets. So what are you doing with regard to assisting the industry create more sources of capital?
This is a very good problem for the insurance industry to have. The insurance industry typically grows at below the rate of GDP growth globally and has highly penetrated set of products. Cyber is not one of them. Today, a single-digit % of all cyber risk is covered by a cyber insurance policy because too few companies buy policies, and those that buy typically don't buy high enough limits. So as we think about the growth of this market, the problem is not on the demand side, the demand for cyber insurance, because by the way, cyber risk is growing over time as we further digitize the economy. The problem is on the supply side, the supply of capital to support this. CyberCube is taking a really proactive role in attracting that capital to this market. And two initiatives that we've launched in the last 6 months are indicative of that. The first is CyberCube worked with structuring agents to create the world's first publicly tradable cyber insurance-linked securities, which act as publicly tradable bonds, but instead of tying to a credit event, they tie to a cyber event. That business got off to a roaring start. And in fact, in Q4, 7.5% of all insurance-linked securities issued globally were issued in the cyberspace, and CyberCube was the modeling agent for all of them. We think that market's going to continue to grow. It's a $50 to $100 billion market for natural catastrophe insurance-linked securities capital, and we believe the market for cyber risk capital could be even larger. Saying that, Don, you shared some pretty eye-popping numbers at the start from the size of cybercrime. Some of these cyber catastrophes are so large, there isn't enough capital on insurer and reinsurer balance sheets, and there isn't enough capital in the insurance-linked securities market to potentially cover things like nation-state to nation-state war. So CyberCube is currently engaged with multiple governments on the potential creation of cyber reinsurance backstops and support for catastrophic cyber events in those particular markets. For example, CyberCube participated very closely with the US Treasury as they investigated and continue to investigate a federal government cyber reinsurance backstop, which is a part of Biden's national cybersecurity strategy. So as we think about the future, there is incredible growth in cyber risk. There's incredible growth in the cyber insurance market. We need to ensure that our models are out there attracting enough insurance, reinsurance, ILS, and even potentially government capital to provide the financial resilience needed to sustain catastrophic cyber events.
So the government does have a role here. And by the way, that sounds like the flood insurance the government provides for those areas where privately provided flood insurance is just not possible.
That's right. And in fact, the federal government does a lot in insurance. And some describe the US federal government as a giant insurance operation with a side hustle in the military. If you think about health, if you think about life and disability and crop and crop and quake and flood and terrorism, virtually all lines of insurance have either very heavy government regulation, the federal government or governments as insurers of last resort. And as we think about the size and scope of cyber risk long term, it's no surprise that the public and private sector are starting to have really thoughtful dialogues on, is there a role for the federal government? But also critically, how can we ensure that any federal government response to catastrophic cyber risk leads to more private sector capital coming into the market and not less? There has been good government policy in insurance, and there's been that has led to a more flourishing private sector. And there have been other government policies that have led to the stymieing of a private sector market for insurance. In cyber, we need both. And I'm confident that the dialogues that are happening right now between the public and private sector are headed in a direction of creating greater resilience for the US economy and other economies around the world, and solutions that make sense for taxpayers, for enterprises, and for insurers.
You mentioned that the hackers are primarily organized crime or nation-state actors. And I know specifically Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are the primary nation-state actors, and they also sponsor organized criminal groups to do hacking. At some point, the insurance industry has to say, enough. That's an act of war. We're not going to pay you back for that because we can't insure against acts of war or terrorism. Where is the cyber insurance industry now on acts of war?
Sure. This is a work in progress. And as we think about this, for hundreds of years, the P&C insurance industry has been unable to cover the costs of wars because there simply is not enough capital on insure and reinsure balance sheets to do so. Insurance is a promise to pay, and it doesn't make sense to make promises that can't be kept. And there is it's very difficult to believe that the insurance industry will be able to cover cyber war when they couldn't cover other forms of war. So there's a very concerted effort right now to say, what are those most extreme scenarios where there really are things like kinetic war that turns into cyber war and a major aggressor trying to enact maximal damage on a particular economy. And it's only for those extreme events that the insurance industry is saying, let's ensure that we have kind of guardrails against those, that we're not making promises to pay that we won't be able to keep, and we're appropriate looking at whether there might be a role for government there. What's critical to note, however, as we think about the wordings that have been rolled out into the cyber insurance market, few, if any, of those wordings will have changed any of the claims that have been paid out over the course of the last 10 years. This is more a future-looking, prospective view to get ahead of what could happen in the future so that when a broker is representing a cyber policy to their enterprise, they're very clear about what that market would include, what that policy would include, and what it wouldn't. But I think enterprises kind of shouldn't fear that the same, even with some of the most restrictive language, the same policies that have proved incredibly valuable to the global economy over the last decade will, by far and away, still be providing that value in the future. We're just really trying to isolate those very, very extreme events and contemplate them now when in advance of them potentially happening.
Well, this has got to be enjoyable for you because clearly you've built a company here that's operating both in North America and on a global stage for both the private sector as well as the public sector. So it's a big opportunity. It's a big wave you're riding, and you are recognized as one of the global leaders in this industry. Let me just come to some closing reflections here, because you're a first-time CEO. And first-time CEOs don't often go the entire route as you have, of starting and then going all the way through this kind of global impact on the company. What's the best piece of advice that you've received along your career journey in terms of your ability to be that long-term CEO?
Yeah, so I would say two things. First would be to never lose sight of the culture of the organization that you have and how that culture needs to evolve over time. But specifically as a CEO, it would be to be open to feedback. I'm very fortunate to have built a tremendous board that has a wide variety of perspectives. I'm very fortunate to have built a tremendous leadership team with a wide variety of perspectives. And as CEO, it's important to me to solicit those perspectives, but ultimately to find my own way in terms of what feels kind of true to me and my leadership style. But what I would say to other CEOs is think about your board and think about your leadership team as some of your greatest assets in terms of providing data points to consider in terms of what you might want to do to be effective today and kind of be effective in the future as the needs of the business change. And boy, do they change as you enter different stages of a company's life cycle.
Well, certainly it's been enjoyable for me to work with you because you are open to new ideas and you're open to direct feedback, which I provide almost to a fault. But you're smiling, I see on the other screen. All right. But now you're in a position in the industry where you can affect change in the cyber insurance industry. What do you see as your opportunity to do that? And what would you like the industry to do to improve?
I think cyber insurance analytics could transform the future of the cybersecurity industry. Cybersecurity could do a lot more with respect to focusing on the ROI of controls. Enterprises have dozens of solutions, are looking at hundreds of vendors, and what insurance analytics does is it really cuts through a lot of the noise and asks the question, what matters with respect to financial impact? What are the security indicators, the vulnerabilities, the tools that are going to do one of two things and are going to reduce the probability of a security incident, or secondly, reduce the severity or cost of that incident? I think insurers have a lot to learn from the technology sector, a lot to learn from the cybersecurity sector, but my hope also is that it's a symbiotic relationship whereby cybersecurity can look at what the insurance industry is seeing and what companies like CyberCube are seeing in their cyber risk analytics and drive better decision-making and a more resilient global economy long-term.
Well, Pascal, that's been our objective here at Forgepoint as well. We recognize we can't be 100% perfect. And at some point, we can't buy another tool or put another person involved. And cyber insurance is one way to transfer risk so that we can continue to build companies successfully. And what you're doing is helping us in that process. So, Pascal, thanks for your time, your dedication, your perseverance of making this successful. Here's to your accomplishments and the continued success of you and your team.
Well, thank you, Don. I certainly could not have done it, and our team couldn't have done it without Forgepoint's partnership from the very beginning.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Subscribe to the Forgecast, which is brought to you by Forgepoint Capital. We're a leading cybersecurity and digital infrastructure venture capital firm that invests in exceptional teams protecting a digital future. To learn more about Forgepoint, visit forgepointcap.com or find us on LinkedIn and Twitter.